All right, welcome back, YouTube, finally to another episode once again, and we're going to be doing one part of the inventory system. This is going to be a multi-part video, probably 2 to 3 parts, but of course, just like everything in this series, it's continually evolving, so it's not just going to be these first 2 or 3 episodes. We're constantly going to come back to several different mechanics that we've created and continually refine them and make them more advanced, and this is definitely one of them. Now, inventory is advanced to begin with, so let's just get into it with design. Now, I'm going to make a disclaimer. I am not a designer or a UI guy at all. But we're going to hop into blueprints, hop into UI. I'm going to make a new folder called inventory, just so that way we can contain all of our inventory blueprints in here. So inside this, we're going to make a user interface. And I'm just going to call this inv underscore main for inventory main. This is going to be the main blueprint doing the inventory. First thing that we're going to want to do is set up kind of main bag, I guess you want to call it, like the section that will contain all of your items in your inventory backpack or whatever you want to call it, right? So the way that I did this is I just grabbed a canvas panel. Now, keep in mind, I'm not a UI or UX person. Real quick, the delineation between UI and UX is user interface and user experience. The user interface is, of course, what you're designing, what you're interacting with, and the user experience is how you're interacting with it, and, of course, the experience of it, if it's enjoyable, if it's irritating, if it's intuitive or not. And usually you want it as simple and intuitive as possible. A perfect example is Apple, Macintosh, iOS are designed so that way a baby can pick it up and use it, and your grandparents or great-grandparents who've never used it can pick it up and use it. And it is genius design. I hate Apple, but it's genius design. I'm not gonna, of course, design anything that good, but we're gonna get as good as we can. So I've kind of set up just some basic things here. We're gonna create this canvas panel and kind of size it up to however big you want. Now I'm gonna copy the exact values that I've made in my project here, just to make things a lot easier. So we've got negative 769. Nice. And for the Y position, we have negative 464. And technically mine does have some decimals and stuff, but we won't be that specific. The size is, I put mine at 700 by 900. This canvas panel is going to be what contains the slots for our inventory, so that way we can click on them and rearrange them and whatnot. We're going to call this main bag. And then within this, we want to get a grid, I believe it is. Uniform grid. Perfect. I'm just going to put that under the hierarchy under the hierarchy of my main bag. And we're going to leave it centered or anchored up here. And all we're going to change for this is the size to just fit the canvas panel. So we can only fit so many things within the main grid. And the first thing that we're going to fit is actually just the title for this. And the way I did that is I just did a border and drag that in. And then within the border, I added some text. So with the border, this can stay the same. We'll stretch it out all the way so that way it fits. And then the alignment, we'll just change that. That's how I had the alignment set up. Now, I did change the brush color just a little bit here. And I kind of just made it a transparent gray. So you can just click on this and kind of go down to gray here, and then just lower the alpha, and the alpha is kind of the transparency. And a good alpha that I did is just half. I feel like that's a little bit too dark of a gray. Maybe not dark enough. There we go. Something like that. The exact value I suppose I used is 1.61. We'll just copy paste that here. That's what I used. So that's how it looks, and it will show through just a little bit. That's all I used the uniform grid panel for, and I was probably intending to use some more things for it. Like I said, I'm not a UI designer, and I'm not the best at, kind of designing how things should look. But the next thing I did was add horizontal boxes. So you can just type in box and get horizontal box. I just dropped it under the main bag. And I kind of just eyeballed this. So I did 50 down and 700 across, of course, to fill it all the way up, and by 50, just to kind of give enough size for the icons. So this is where the icons will fit in. And it is good to name all of your UI elements if you're using them as variables in your graph, which most likely you will be. And since this is the first row, we'll call this row 1. This doesn't, I did 70, not 700. And then you can just duplicate this, Control C, Control V, and put it right back under the bag there. I'll call this row 2. And then once again, spaced it out, so I did 150 by 750 there. Okay. So this is where your items would show up whenever we're added to the bag. I didn't actually change the text, so I'm going to change this to inventory. And now we can move on to our equipment. And for the equipment, I kind of followed the same line. So I'm just going to copy this, click on Canvas panel and paste it. And then we'll change this to equipment window. And then we need to size this back to where it belongs. So -769, -464, and then everything else is fine. So let's go in here and change a few things. Of course, we can just change the text. I suppose I can click on it like this and do equipment. Okay, so now you might notice that you can see the equipment and the inventory. We don't really want to see both of them at the same time while we're working on it, at least. So they have a really nice feature where you can just hide other elements. So you can see you can hide them both or hide everything. It's whatever. So we're just going to hide the main bag since we're working on equipment. So we don't want these two rows here the way we had them previously. I'm going to delete them, even though we are going to use horizontal rows later. And what we want to add is another canvas panel. I'm going to add a canvas panel under here. And the size for this is going to be 700 by 850. And it's actually going to be moved down just a little bit on the Y. I'm going to move it down 40. Just that way. I mean, like I said, it's not perfect. It's overlapping with that a little bit, but we don't care a ton just because of how we're going to position the next stuff. So we're going to grab another horizontal box. Actually, just going to grab 2 right now. C, Control V. I'm just going to call this slot 1. And call this one slot 2. I'm probably going to rename them primary and secondary in a bit, but just for ease, this is what they're called right now. So we can leave the anchor where it's at, but we do want to mess with the position. So the position we want is 50 by 75 on the XY, and the size we want is 100 by 100. And then we're going to do the same kind of thing here on the secondary one, except we want 200 by 75 on the XY. And still 100 by 100. So now we need a couple little titles for these, and the way I did that is I just did the same thing we did for the big titles. I just added borders. Control C, Control V, and this is going to be 45, or pardon me, 50 by 45 by 100 by 30. It can just stay how it is. And then we want to kind of change the color or the tint of it, the brush, to the exact same thing. So we can just grab this, and let's see, we can grab the hex, because that's a quick way to do it. Go back over here, brush color, and paste the hex. Okay, now it looks the exact same. So then let's just add text to this. And I'm going to delete the other border in a bit because we can just duplicate this and rename it. So I'll delete the other border I made. We can duplicate this whenever we're done. But I'm going to have this say primary. And we will put this down to 15. And it fits in there nicely. And then I'm just going to have it center because, you know, who doesn't love some centered text? So we're going to copy the border and paste it again on our canvas panel that we're working on. And then with this one, we'll just rearrange it the same way to 145 and leave it the same. And then, of course, we can modify the text here to be secondary. And that's about all we're going to do for that. Like I said, I think I'm going to rename this to primary slot and secondary slot, just for the variables, because these are the slots that are going to contain our slot user interface. User interfaces are kind of interesting and weird, at least from my experience, because I'm like I said, I'm not experienced with user interface a ton. But it's really interesting how Unreal does it. You can make a user interface and then import that as use in another interface. And if you think about it, it's really great. It's just like blueprints and children, all that stuff, just nesting stuff. So that way you can use the same thing iteratively. Well, that's the exact thing that we're going to do. We're going to make an inventory slot now. So if you go down back to your inventory folder that we made, do user interface, we can do inv_slot. This is a perfect time to save, so Control-Shift-S and open up your inventory slot. So what we're going to do here is grab another border and position it to 0, 0, because this isn't anything that we're going to look at. We're purely going to use this slot in other blueprints, i.e. our main inventory. It's going to fit in here. So 100 by 100 is what we want the size to be. Now, since we want this to be a button, and something we can interact with, we're going to drag a button underneath it. Lastly, drag an image underneath that. So that way we can have, you know, this containing the button, which contains our image, which we can set to whatever our icon is, right? And we're actually going to set the image size to 256 by 256. And leave these settings back to where they were to be centered. But in other instances where you know that your UI might scale up and down, which it actually should for resolutions, that's something we'll get into much later, then yeah, you would want this to horizontally and vertically fill, so that way the button size could be dynamic and blah, blah, blah. Like I said, tons of details. We'll get there. Now let's go back to our main inventory. I'm just going to save up here. And we're going to add the navigation bar, which allows us to switch from our equipment window to our inventory window. So I'm going to hide both of these, and we're going to get another box, another horizontal box, that is. And I need to actually set the anchor. That'd be helpful. Okay, there we go. Negative 769 by negative 520. And there you can see it kind of sets it up in the top. So let's scale it to what we know we want. We want 700 at least. And then the thickness I did is just 50 because we're only going to have little tabs there, no images or icons. Though you could fit them in if you'd like. So I'm just going to collapse this right here and then rename this to navbar. Now we need to add a button here. And a piece of text to that button. So for the button, we want to open up the style and change the normal style to just be like darker once again. I'm going to make it even a slightly darker gray and make it even less than 0.5% opaque. Just that way it's basically an invisible background, and then whenever we hover over it, you can see here it'll be lighter, and you can change however it looks when you press. That's a whole different world once again. So let's change this text here to inventory. I'm going to name the button inventory button as well. Now we just need to duplicate it. Oh, Control C, click the nav bar, Control V. It'll automatically add it afterwards, which is exactly what we want. I'm just going to change this to equipment button. And then change the text to equipment. Change this to text, and I realized I named this inventory, which is fine or whatever, but it'll tell us, okay. Whatever, there we go. So now if we unhide everything, we can see we've got the two things overlapping, which is fine, but we've got a nice little nav bar floating up above, so that way we can click one or the other and it will swap to the other page. But how do we add that functionality? Well, first we actually need to make a few things as variables. So let's make main bag a variable. Let's make equipment window a variable. And then we will need to make our buttons variables as well, just double checking that they already are. Perfect. So now go to whichever one you'd like to start. I'm going to do inventory first, and you'll want to scroll all the way to the bottom and hit the plus on clicked. Since we want to show our inventory, we're going to set visibility of the equipment window to hidden. And then we'll duplicate this and set the visibility of the main bag to visible. Just that easy. We're going to do the exact same thing, but opposite, of course. For the equipment button, scroll down to the bottom here, on clicked, and you can just copy everything from right here, because that's all we're using. Connect it, and then just switch. So we want this to be visible, this to be hidden, and it's going to do it instantaneously. Now, if you notice any visual glitches or bugs, you might want to swap these around, which I'm going to do now just for saving myself the trouble, because you honestly never know if it is going to flash just for a second, one before it hides the other, or however, right? So I'm just going to make sure it hides one before it shows the other. So the inventory, basic logic, just to even have the windows there, and actually that's not even logic, but just to even switch between the windows and have some buttons that we can click on that will give functionality later, that's just there. We can't even open it in our character. If we go into our character and I hit play, I would like inventory to be tab. You can make it I or P or whatever, but you can hear I'm hitting my keyboard on those buttons. Nothing shows up. No button that I press is going to make that show up because, of course, we haven't added that functionality. So let's add it. I'm going to go over to my player here, open him up, and we'll want to head to the begin play. Now we're already adding our HUD, which is perfect. And now afterwards, we want to add our inventory. So let's create widget, and we want this to be inventory main, okay? And of course, our owning player should be player controller. I was just making sure I had that on the other one. And then we need to promote this to a variable so we can play with it later. Let's name it inventory UI. And we just want to check is valid. And if you've seen my other videos, you know why. Because if you're trying to reference something that isn't valid, most of the time, I'd say half the time or so, it's not going to break anything. Mostly it's not going to crash your game, but it will dump a crap ton of errors, and you're going to be like, why am I getting these errors, and if you're not good with debugging, this just saves you the trouble. It's like, well, it's not here, I'm not going to even try and reference it. So of course, if it's not valid, you'll continue on with the rest of your begin play logic, and if it is valid, we need to add to viewport, drag off of here and add to viewport, and immediately set visibility to hidden, because we don't want the inventory being the first thing the player sees, especially if they have nothing in it at the beginning of the game. So if we hit play, let's just make sure that the inventory doesn't show up. Good, it doesn't show up, but we still can't trigger it. So let's add that. I'm going to go into my settings, and we're just going to make sure that we have a button bound to tab, or whatever you want your inventory button to be, so that way we can open it. And it doesn't look like I do, so I'm just going to add plus on action mappings and open inventory. Like I said, I want to make this tab because I'm weird. and we can head back to our blueprint. So let's just save up real quick. I'm going to go to the top. I really need to comment some of this stuff out. Sprint, whatever. Cool. Now let's open inventory. And the first thing we should do is check is valid, because we're going to be referencing our inventory. So if for some reason, you forgot to connect this logic, or something happened to this variable and you're trying to call your inventory, once again, you're going to get errors if it's not there. So let's branch get visibility, and then we're just going to do equals, that way, equal enum rather, so that way we can pick what we want to compare it against. And we want to see if it's hidden. I'm going to grab another inventory UI, and we're actually going to want to grab our HUD as well. So if it is hidden, I just want to set the visibility of this to visible, and set the visibility of our HUD to hidden. Now, if you had a differently designed HUD than me, or just complete UI, like if you're like genius with UI or whatever, to where you can have it integrated right in. I mean, there are plenty of games where the HUD still shows and the inventory and all that stuff, just because there's much better UI designers than me. Or, of course, if it fits your purpose better. It's whatever works for you. This is a game, this is creative, and we need to make it work for us, right? So we can do that. And then, of course, on the other end of the spectrum, we just want to hide the UI and set the HUD to visible if it is not hidden. So, if it's not hidden, which means it's visible, and we hit tab again, we want to do this. So this is a toggle thing. If you wanted it to show the inventory only while you're holding tab, that's a different feature. Put that in the comments if you want that feature shown. Okay, so I'm gonna cut the episode short because the next steps are much kind of tedious and is better for our next episode. But just to show you how to interact and get the mouse shown, because if we hit tab, I'll show you right now. If we hit tab, it's going to show up and our HUD's going to disappear, but we're still going to be controlling our character, which we don't want. We'll cover that in the next episode. But we want our mouse. We can't click. So I'm going to do that right now. I'm going to get player controller and set show mouse cursor. So of course we want it to be true up here, and we want it to be false down here. We want it to go back away whenever we hide. So let's give that a shot, eh? I'm gonna hit play, tab. Of course our mouse is still going to be controlling our camera because we haven't disabled that, but I can click inventory. It's going to show our inventory. I can hit equipment, and it's going to show our equipment. Now, you may have seen there at the beginning a few weird bugs. Bug 1 is if I clicked immediately on inventory, it didn't select it, and then it started hovering over and stopped moving my mouse. That's because it doesn't know that we're controlling the UI. Once again, covering that in the next episode. And you can see that our equipment and in the back, our inventory are showing at the same time. We don't want that. Well, the second one I can fix for you real quick. That's how the inventory is displayed at the start. You actually need to set this programmatically in the properties. So you can hit equipment window, scroll down here. I passed it, hidden. Okay, so we can still see it here, but it'll be hidden in game at the beginning. So that should do it. There we go. So we can only see the inventory. We're gonna click now. It knows we can do equipment, inventory, da da da. Okay, cool. So that's just the beginning. Of course, there's still lots of bugs, like we can press and hold the mouse and drag around like we're clicking and dragging, and it allows us to control our camera. I can still walk around and jump, and I should still even be able to interact with our weapons. Yeah, and we don't want any of that. I can shoot and aim and all that stuff. We don't want to be able to do that while the inventory is open. Now, I 100% understand there are games that do that, and you do want that. If that's something you want, we can figure something out with these tutorials. But as the general rule, that's not what we want. So I'm going to cover that in the next section, in the next episode on the inventory, disabling all of those features and then re-enabling them all whenever we close the inventory. Thank you so much for sticking around, watching my videos, and I hope this helped out. If you have any questions, throw it in the comments. Probably won't be able to get to them because I haven't had a ton of time recently. It's taken me a while even to make this one. But once again, thank you so much, and I'll catch you in the next one.